Welcome back to Rooted in the Caribbean, our Women in Leadership series. And today, my guest is Trisha Laverne Quashie-Boney. Trisha has been an HR professional for over 20 years, and she has led successful teams managing people services and providing both operational and strategic workforce expertise. She's a passionate practitioner whose desire is to cultivate the talent of those around her and draw out the very best in those that she leads. Trisha Laverne has led multiple workforce-related projects and programs of people or HR work across a range of complex services, both in the private and public sector, spanning the UK and Trinidad and Tobago. Trisha is a mother of 3 children who are her heartbeats and the main recipients of her time and energy outside of work. She also serves her community by volunteering and working with children in her local church, another area that she's really passionate about. Please welcome Trisha Laverne Quashie-Boney. Hello and welcome to Rooted in the Caribbean, our Women in Leadership series. And today my guest is Trisha Laverne Quashie. I have known Trisha since we were both 17, so it's been a while. And throughout those years, we've seen each other's career careen across the UK and the Caribbean. Welcome, Laverne. Welcome to Rooted in the Caribbean.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. As I said, we've known each other for a really, really long time, but I know some about you, some bits of your roots, but share with us what are your roots and, what do roots mean for you?
Right, roots. So, I am originally from Trinidad and Tobago. Lovely, warm islands, twin islands back in the Caribbean. And I have to say Trinidad and Tobago because when we're talking about roots, my mom is from Trinidad, but my dad is from Tobago.
Right.
So I have, one-on-one. So
Yeah,
Trinidad and Tobago
yeah,
is where I'm from. Roots are very interesting, isn't it? Because even though from Trinidad and Tobago, when I kind of sort of delve a little bit sort of further back, the Caribbean is a melting pot as they call
yeah.
it, isn't it? Lots of, intertwining and, people from everywhere. My mom's mom was from Venezuela. So I have a Spanish grandmother,
Right.
a mother who was born in Trinidad, and my dad was born and grew up, spent his early years in Tobago.
Tobago.
Yes, and then here I am,
Yeah.
and I'm very grateful for being born and having those roots because I do think they play an important part in who I am, not just in who
Right.
I was, who I am, and who I will continue to be. And I am glad that I actually was, sort of born and rooted in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago. I think it's an awesome place to have been born. It's an awesome place to live. And yeah, I'm grateful for that.
So how do you think that those influences have shown up in who you are as a leader?
Yeah, so that's quite interesting, Dominique. I think those things do show up because they sort of kind of almost in your DNA
Mm.
kind of thing. I think in the Caribbean, you have a strong sense of, I think it's kind of two extremes,
Mm.
back home in Trinidad, you have either very strong sort of quite diligent and sort of ambitious and, very focused
Yeah.
and that perspective, or you could be on the other extreme where, we the word is lackadaisical,
Mm.
what happens, que sera, sera,
Yeah.
it's quite laid back. So there's a kind of broad spectrum of, who Caribbean people are, and people are sort of on that spectrum. And I think for me, the Caribbean sort of upbringing instilled in me quite, a lot of discipline, that you put your all
Yeah.
into whatever it is that you're kind of doing. You sort of be focused. I think for me too as well, there's a very strong religious side because in back home in the Caribbean, we are quite what you would call sort of religious. So for me, it's gone beyond religion. So I wouldn't say it's religion, um, because I'm a Christian. I believe in God, and that's sort of foundation of
Yeah,
being, someone of faith, has also instilled, some principles, I think, in me,
yeah,
which has definitely sort of shaped who I am and who I show up as, as a leader in the workplace. And, it's something that's literally instilled, I think. So, as growing up in a Caribbean household, growing up, with faith-based values, growing up with all of those things, they shape who you become.
Mm,
And it's kind of hard to kind of deviate from that. And I have chosen not to deviate
right.
from that. And so that has definitely sort of,
Influenced.
yeah, yeah, it definitely has.
Now, one of the things I do know about you is you didn't take the traditional route in terms of, growing up in the Caribbean, your parents kind of insist that you finish high school and you must go off to university. And you took a different route. You chose to work in at first. And how has that influenced, do you think, how your career journey has developed?
Yeah, I think it definitely has. And to today, I don't even know why. I was quite adamant as to no, I didn't want to go to university. When that was, the sort of next thing to do. And I am one of three. I'm in the middle. My brother was ahead of me, I think a year or 2 years.
Yeah.
He went off to university. I thought actually it would have been, yeah, you go off too. But I didn't want to for some
Right.
reason. So I wanted to work, and I think that was a bit of trying independence.
Sure.
And I think, I wanted to start earning to kind of get, my feet wet in the world of work. And once I started working, I then did the studies alongside, which was in hindsight the harder thing to do. Should have just gone to university, studied all that I needed to study, then come out and work. No, I wanted things a little bit more challenging. But at the same time, but I think what that helped me to do is that, quite early on, I started to understand, the world of work and,
Mm.
what it's like, sort of out there working. I probably would have been 17, 18, kind of when I started off. Um, I started off in banking in the financial sort of services. So I think it probably um made sense when I started to study again. Things made a little bit more sense because I
Okay,
had
it was more relatable.
practical, yeah, because I had the practical experience in the what we would call now a 9 to 5, then
Yeah,
8 to 4. But it kind of made sense because you can kind of make some correlations, and it just kind of made things a little bit easier to understand or to appreciate rather. So it wasn't just theoretical. You could
yeah,
kind of then say, "Oh, okay, I see it," and I
yeah.
think that has helped.
And you went on to have children, so I know you have two daughters and a son. In that time, as you grew in terms of or developed in your career, what sort of sacrifices did you have to make as a woman in, stepping into leadership and continuing in leadership?
Hmm. That's sacrifices for sure. There were lots of it, and I think there continues to be it. I think, once you kind of have children, I don't think it stops. And I think for
Right,
me, and I would say, I guess as God would have it, I think, my kids are spaced out. So I
right.
have one that's in university, one that's in secondary school, and one that's 5, and just in primary school have just started. So whereas most people are kind of rejoicing because, in my age group, because their kids are towards the other end of the spectrum and are in uni or heading there, I have and
The whole
continue to
spectrum.
have, yeah, some of those challenges and having to make some of those sacrifices.
Yeah.
And so over the years, I wouldn't say that it was easy. I
Mm.
think, there are lots of sacrifices. And I remember when I first started off in management, my eldest, my first daughter, was just about 6 months. I came off of maternity leave
Mm.
early. I would say early because we could have had 9 months and you could have taken an additional 3 months, but I went back when she was just about sort of kind of 6 months, and so she was quite young. And then soon after I went into this management role. So
Mm.
very young baby, I'll still call at
Yeah.
that time. And to the management role that I took up, it took me sort of 2 hours journey each week.
Mm.
So a day was filled with almost about 4 hours traveling,
Yeah.
commuting, then having a sort of a full day, and then having to kind of come home late in the evening and still deal with this young
Young child.
child. And of course, when you're kind of now starting off in management and leadership, there's all of
To
these
prove
wants
yourself.
and the yes, and then there's all of these, also the things that you want to do, the
Mm.
nursery stuff, and then the preschool, and then the school stuff, and there were some of them that I couldn't go to and I
Yeah.
couldn't attend because I needed to sort of be in the office, and all of this was in the days of pre-COVID and in the earlier days where, you kind of had to
You
be
have to
in the
physically be
office.
present. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And so those those were the days. And
Mm.
so there were a number of sacrifices then. There are still a number of sacrifices now. Personal sacrifices in terms of, my own time. So even now I have to kind of sort of juggle. So you put in what you need to put in for work, and the remaining time, or the other time that you kind of have, do I choose to do something that I want to do, or no? Do I spend time, sort of with the
Yeah, with the
kids, doing what the
family.
kids
Yeah.
need?
Yeah.
And there is that, sacrifice. It exists, it continues to exist, but there isn't anything that I will say in terms of regrets. And so whereas there are sacrifices, I think in many ways I choose to look at them as investments. So an investment in my career,
Hmm.
um,
And
when
in
I'm
their future.
sacrificing, correct, and an investment in their future too as well.
Yeah.
So
And
that's how I
do you
choose to
think
look at
that
it.
changes how you lead others because of your own lived experiences?
I think it does. I think it does. So, I started off talking to Dominic about, some principles,
Mm.
etc., that I kind of live by. One of those sort of principles is around, treating others the way I would like to be treated myself. And that's something I try to live by. And so having had sort of lived experiences, and my own experiences, I can sort of relate. I can sort of empathize where I need to and understand different, person's journeys and where they
Mm.
are at, and what they may need in terms of support. And because as a leader, I think it's important to sort of understand that, because you're trying to get the best out of people in
Sure.
whatever they're doing. And actually, if you're trying to juggle, and concerned and worried about things like, childcare and managing with their kids, etc., having an understanding of where people are at kind of helps shape, okay, what solutions can you sort of offer? Or, how do you sort of look at things in context? Because that's also something that's important to do. So I think definitely my sort of lived experiences do shape how I view things and the
Yeah.
lens through which I, see people and how they show up in the workplace and what they
Yeah.
may sort of need.
Okay. How would you describe your leadership style as a woman in leadership, as a Black woman, as a Caribbean
Mhm.
woman, as, all of those elements of who you are? How would you describe your leadership style?
So I think my leadership style is sort of one. I'd like to think that I'm a sort of a collaborative leader. I also think that, I hope I am at least, one that's sort of approachable and a leader that, engages. I am not autocratic. I'm not, one that it's my way or the highway. I believe that, as a leader, we need to kind of have the vision, we need to set the scene, but actually we need to take people along and sort of with us on the journey. And I
Yeah.
don't ever profess to sort of know it all or to have all of the answers. I know where I want to go. I know where I
Sure.
want to get to. I know where the able, but I need people because people bring expertise, people bring ideas, people bring solutions. And I, as a leader, I want people to share that and to bring that to the table so that together we can achieve what we need to achieve.
Mm.
So I like collaboration. I like engaging with others. I like people to bring their thoughts, to give their ideas, to even if it's different to
Mm.
what I think, I still want to hear it. I may have a view and I may then share that, but I want to
Mm.
hear what your thoughts are because I may
Yeah.
learn something from it, or we may collectively learn from it because I might say, well, okay, I don't quite agree with that, and here's why. And that may be a learning point for you.
Mm.
But in the same vein, may a part of it, even though I don't agree with it, there may be a part that says actually that does kind of make sense, but here's how it could work. So that's how I think I view my kind of leadership style
Style.
in.
And a lot of what you just described to me resonates from a diversity perspective. Though diversity of thought, diversity of, how what people bring to the table and how they show up.
Yes.
How has diversity in its truest sense impacted or influenced how you show up as a leader?
Yeah, a very interesting question. And one that's I think quite, kind of close to my heart because definitely, and so if I look at it in its truest sort of sense, and when I look at my own sort of kind of journey, Caribbean roots from Trinidad. I'm currently in the UK. Haven't been born in the UK as a woman, a woman minoritized as black, coming in sort of into the world of work. Many sort of areas of diversity there. And so it's something that I live with, and we go back to, sort of lived experiences. So for me, it's always important to understand different perspectives, to allow diversity to be a part of anything and everything, because there is no sort of kind of one viewpoint that is the be all and end all. There is no, there's this thing about it's either black or it's white. Well, actually, I don't think life is like that. And I think, variety, as the saying goes, is the
The
spice of
spice of
life.
life.
And so it's important in everything to be able to get different perspectives, to be able to have different sort of viewpoints. And that's it from its kind of purest sense in terms of, diversity in my journey, in my sort of career journey. I think it has sort of impacted my career and my pathway. I think it's a challenge and at the best of times, I think to sort of kind of break through as a woman. We're talking about, being different as a woman going into management, going into leadership, but also a woman from a, what I would call global majority. In the past we would call ethnic sort of minorities. And, you have to be able to kind of navigate that kind of pathway because there are still prejudices, there are still unconscious biases that exist that people do have. But I think what's important is being true to yourself. I think
Yeah.
what's important is showing the value that you bring. What's important is showing who you are. And this is why I'm needed. This is what I bring to the table. And I think that speaks for itself.
Volumes. Yeah.
Yeah, in many instances.
And how have you been able to help other people to navigate that? Because I know you've done programs and you've been part of teams that have focused on, empowering women and empowering diverse women as well. So how have you been able to kind of translate your own lived experience into supporting others?
Good question, Dominique. And I think in answer to that, I think part of it is showcasing where it has been done. And I think in many instances, what's important is that, that other women, see there is somebody who's managed to kind of do this. There is,
Yeah.
somebody who's navigated, a particular pathway and has managed to come out at the other end. Oh, I'm not alone, in this journey. And I think that's part of it. I think it's about, being true to yourself. And I use that term sort of before. Sometimes, we could arrive somewhere and think,
Mm.
yes, I've done it and it was easy. And, but you don't tell the backstory. You don't
Mm.
share about the sacrifices. You don't share about what it took, the blood, sweat, and tears that it took to move from point A to point B, or what you had to kind of give up. Go back to sort
Mm.
of kind of the
Sacrifices.
sacrifices, and sometimes that's where the power is in the
Mm.
story, in the journey, and what you have learned kind of along the way, and some of the pitfalls, and where you had to take a tumble down a hill and then climb yourself out of the hill and get back on the journey. But I think that's part of it. It's about sharing the stories, about encouraging others. It's
Mm.
about helping others, I think, too, as well, where they are at, and mentoring where possible, coaching where
Mm.
possible, sharing, tips and help. It's about helping each other, I think, on this journey. And I don't think we can downplay the importance of
Of
that.
that. What would you say has been your or one of your defining moments as a woman in leadership?
There has been a few.
Mm.
But there's one there's one that kind of stands out sort of in my mind, and kind of goes back to, the foundations of, what you're doing, Dominic, in terms of your kind of roots and heritage, and how that kind of shows up, in who you are. And I remember in years and years ago, I'm going back to almost when I kind of started off in my first sort of management role, and it had its challenges,
Yeah.
lots of challenges kind of there. And we were talking about sort of leadership styles, and I
Mm.
had CPO, back then they were HR directors, but
Yeah.
chief people officer in today's terminologies, who had a completely opposite. We were like polar opposites in terms
Right.
of our leadership styles. And so when anything went wrong, she would go, and that was kind of her approach. And then you had me on the other end, who would be like, okay, that's happened. Okay, so we need to fix it. Let's fix it. And this has always kind of been my sort of approach, let's keep it
Yeah.
calm, let's keep it thing. Let's not, get carried away. Let's address what the issue is. Let's fix it. Let's learn from it. And let's move on. Nobody died. It's fine. Let's kind of move on. And so it was an interesting sort of time sort of working with this and the leader eventually moved
Okay.
on from the organization. I always kind of thought to myself, that's very sort of interesting. I did what I had to do. And I thought, yeah, not sure how that relationship went, not sure how she kind of viewed me as a manager and as a leader,
Yeah.
but hey.
But you had to
And
take a stand.
yeah, but I had to. And I had to be me.
Hmm.
I had to be me. And it was interesting. Soon after the CPO had moved on, she contacted me. It was within about probably 2 months or thereabouts. And what she contacted me to ask me to do was to come. She had a position that she wanted me to take. She said that I'm perfect for it, and she wants me to come and sort of work with her in this new role. It was a promotion, and one of them, she went, your leadership and your approach and your style is exactly what I need and I want. But I nearly fell off the chair that I was sitting on because, as I said, we were like complete
Polar
opposites. We were like,
opposite.
why aren't you panicking? Because I don't panic.
Mm.
We always kind of had that kind of approach, but she saw what I kind of brought and respected, I guess, what
Yeah.
what I brought. And whereas she wasn't kind of like that, it was interesting that
She saw the value.
she saw it and then
Yeah.
wanted it, sort of in her new. No, I didn't take up the job. I think there was enough in that kind of experience, and I learned what I needed to learn from there. But for me, I think, that said something to me in that, be true to yourself, be who
Yeah.
you are, even though others are not sort of like that, and that's the environment that you may be in. You still
Yeah.
show up as
Don't
who you
lose.
are and who and stay true to my principles,
Hmm.
and so that was something that was defining for me, that regardless of what environment that you're in and what you may encounter, is about being me.
Yeah. And you said something there about, and that's authenticity. If you put it into one word, being authentic. And
Mm,
it's often difficult to
mm,
be two things at once. And the two that I wanted to share was that authenticity as well as vulnerability.
yeah.
Because I think as leaders, male, female, we have been cultured to come across as perfect.
Mm,
Like you have it all together.
yeah.
There are no chinks in the armor. We've got this.
Mhm.
But being authentic and also being vulnerable brings a new dimension to leadership.
Mm.
Has that been your experience as well?
It has, and you're right. It does because from the minute people hear, okay, you're a leader, you're a manager, you're in charge. There's this almost burden on you, isn't it? That
Mm.
you should have all of the answers, and you should
Yes.
have all of the, when people come to you, you should be able to say, right, it's A, or it's B, or it's C, or this is the path that you need to take, and you need to have all of the answers. And whereas there's an element of truth in that, as a leader, you should be able to have some of the answers. In
Yeah.
reality, you will never have all of the answers. And if you have all of the answers, well, I don't know. Do you really? But you may think that you do. Because no one is perfect, no
Yeah.
one knows it all. And I think part of being the leader is sometimes the answers are in the people who are
Mm.
coming, and it's how we kind of draw that out, and it kind of goes back to the whole sort of kind of collaboration, and sometimes it's about all of us pitching in to come up
Mm.
with that sort of solution. So it may be, okay, this is what I'm thinking. You, Dominique, may bring a sort of different perspective, and we could pull out a part of that perspective, which I can then say, okay, great. Yeah, actually, that's what we can do. Use my idea. We put your bit in, and we put something else from it, and that's how we get to where we need to get to.
Yeah.
And whereas, sometimes as leaders we think that's a weakness and that's a feeling
Mm.
if we say we don't know. But I think it's better, and the whole thing about being a leader is about trust. It is
Yes.
about trust, and and that kind of safety, that you create that psychological safety, and a big part of that is being able to trust each other. And I think that being vulnerable helps with
Mm.
that trust. Because if I say, actually, I don't know, I'm not sure. This is one thing, but I'm not sure is probably better than pretending, oh, I know it all and I don't have a clue. Talk a pack of nonsense. And then we end up in more problems. Whereas what I should have said was, I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
I'm willing to hear what your thoughts are, and collectively we can come up with something. We try it. If it doesn't work, go back to the drawing board and we come again.
Yeah. Yeah. That psychological safety element that you
Mm.
mentioned, it's really, I think, shifted post pandemic.
Mm.
People's mental health have
Yeah.
been truly impacted throughout the pandemic, post pandemic, and people have made lots of life choices, that
Mm.
are different to what was the tradition. I mean, when I was growing up, my parents' view was you get a government job
Yeah.
or a civil servant job,
Yeah.
and you stay there.
That's life.
Like, that's life. That's it. Beginning to end, why would you want to do anything differently?
Yeah.
But people want more. People want
Yeah.
different things, but they also want to feel safe in
Yeah.
any environment that they find themselves in. I guess, as you rightly said, we don't have all the answers, but what's one of the things that you've cultivated in your workspace to create that psychological safety for others?
And I think part of it is just about the care, I think,
Mm.
and the sort of kind of concern and looking out for each other. And I
Mm.
think that's important, where there are no hidden agendas, where I ask you, Dominique, how are you? And
Mm.
I genuinely want to know, how are you? Are
Yeah.
you all right? As opposed to, there's something, and part of the psychological shift is thinking, what is she after? What does she want? Is she just me? And that's what people do think, there must be something sort of behind that. She really doesn't want to go
Behind
out
that
and live with her.
question.
And part of that is around human behavior and about, kind of sort of protecting yourself, isn't it? Because, unfortunately there are, sort of people who do have hidden agendas and all of that. But I think for me, part of cultivating that environment is around care, that genuine care and concern for another human being. That, you
Yeah.
know what, it kind of doesn't matter what job title you have, it doesn't
Mhm.
matter who you are. Actually, if you are okay, that's great. If you're not okay, what can we do to kind
Yeah.
of sort of make it kind of better? And that's not, again, ultimately in the workspace, you're there to produce, you're there to be productive, you're there
Results.
to
Yeah.
achieve, right? But if we are not okay, because we show up with whatever we are going through, we don't leave, whatever we have going on, and whether that's family, whether that's money, whether that's just life, whatever it is, we don't leave those things by the door. We come with all of those things when we show up at work to do our jobs. And when I say show up, it doesn't always mean physically, but
Yeah.
when you are at work. And so if people aren't kind of okay, it will eventually bleed through
Spill
into
over.
what they do. Yeah. And so there's a very strong business case actually for that whole concept of treating people as people,
Mm.
and just looking after people, because people are valuable. And I think it's important to just have that culture, that environment of caring for each other, looking out for each other, checking
Yeah.
in on each other. I think it's important, and so that's what I try to do.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier on you have two daughters.
Yes.
What do you want to be different for them when they walk into leadership as women? What are
Mm.
the experiences or obstacles that you've had to overcome that you hope are no longer obstacles in the future?
So yeah, what I would hope for my daughters, and again, I've got that sort of difference in sort of age. So for my older daughter, I think she's kind of there. She's already
Mm.
in sort of university, and so it's only probably going to be a couple of years, 2, 3 years before she's actually full-fledged in the world of work. Whereas my youngest, she has some time still. What I would hope for is a world where they can show up in whatever area that is, whatever profession, whatever angle that they choose to, to go into, that they can go in there and have almost an equal, and I'm saying equal, as a woman, they're not going to be looked at any differently
Yeah.
to their male counterparts. Again, doesn't matter what field, what industry, but that there's a world that is, I would hope for a world that's free of bias. I think that's probably me hoping for, utopia, but as bias free as we can possibly get. I would hope that, yeah, that they would be able to enter into leadership and not have to sort of face some of those sort of challenges,
Yeah.
where they are seen for who they are and
Mhm.
what they bring, what they can do, and not have to fight against, some stereotypes. Yeah, I mean, I was laughing, I was chuckling to myself recently, and I was thinking back that as recent as a mere probably months ago, you can calculate it in months, but where I was asked to produce minutes for a meeting, and I wasn't there as a note taker.
Right.
I'm in my capacity. And I just said, no, I'm sorry. No. And,
There was this perception.
that, yeah, you're the female. You're the only female that was here. So can you produce minutes? No, I'm sorry, I can't. No. But it shouldn't sort of have to be that. I don't want, them to, to feel that, especially if they're not trying to get on the wrong, now
Mhm.
trying to get on the ladder, that these are some of the things that they have to kind of accept because it's just part and parcel of, it's just a minor inconvenience that they're going to have to accept in order to kind of, to get ahead.
Yeah.
So hopefully they won't have to face some of those things.
Okay. And I guess my last question is there anything as a woman in leadership throughout your career that you would want to share with younger leaders or those considering leadership? What would be your advice for them?
My advice would be just be yourself. I think
Mhm.
know what you carry, know what you have, and don't be afraid to kind of sort of put it out there. I think many times, especially, kind of going back to, your sort of roots and so on. I mean, one of the things that I think culturally, from the Caribbean, and I think it's probably more, again, something that we as Black people may face is that we are not very comfortable when it comes to like selling yourself and talking about, because you kind of feel that it's a bit arrogant, and
Mhm.
we're not sort of brought up to be arrogant and proud and that kind
Yeah.
of thing. I think there's a cultural sort of element naturally prone towards selling yourself or showing your value, what you bring, but there's a element of, and this is not about being arrogant, but this is a there's something about being confident in who you are
Mhm.
and letting that shine through, and being confident to share what you carry, what you
Yeah.
have, what you bring, what is valuable that you have that they need, that they may not know
Mhm.
that they need yet, but you carry it. And so from get go, as if it's a young woman, or I mean, it could be, kind of heading up the ladder there. But it's about, yeah, being true to yourself, but knowing what you have and not being afraid to to let others kind of see it. Don't hide it. It's not necessarily going to do you sort of any favors, but it may help bring you to the fore quicker than if they have to kind of see it themselves, because that will take time. But if you highlight it, then
Yeah.
it makes it easy. They can then look out for it and say, ah, yes,
I
yes, they did
remember.
say they had that. Yeah, they have it, as opposed to them having to discover it themselves. It's going to take more
Themselves.
time. So it
Yeah.
could help accelerate
Your
your
progress.
progress. Yeah.
So being unapologetically you.
You summed it up very nicely there, Dominique.
Thank you, Laverne. Thank you for sharing so openly. And, I guess if you look back now on that
Mm,
young girl, 17, 18, who decided to make that transition into the world of work
mm.
then, sooner rather than later, I would say that you can happily tell your younger self, it was worth it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, yeah, by God's
Mhm.
grace.
Yes.
And indeed by God's grace. Wasn't easy, but we start on a journey and we reach a certain milestone on a journey, and we
Yeah.
thank God for his grace,
Yep.
which has kind of kept us there.
For
And
sure.
I believe that our steps are, ordered.
Hmm.
May seem like madness at the time. I still to look back and think, why did I do that? But,
Yeah, it's definitely made you who you are
yeah, yeah, for
as a
sure.
woman. So
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Dominique. It was a pleasure. And again, thank you so much. I feel really honored and, appreciative of the opportunity to come and chat with you. Thank you.
Thank you.